Hey, welcome everybody to our AI and the environment friend or foe panel. We're excited for everybody to join us. This is my first Mozilla MozFest session of 2021. So we're kickstarting with an environmental discussion, which is great. And I'm very happy that we're joined by Jackie Snow, Arunesh Sinha, and Khari Johnson. I'll give a little intro into the panel and sort of the order of today for the next hour. But while I'm doing that, for those of you who are joining us, it might be nice if you can write down your name and maybe what brings you to the session so that the panelists and I can also see like who you are and what you want to get out of it. So John and Sarah of Mozilla, they organized this panel to bring together sort of leading journalists and experts who are looking at AI and the environment, both the unharnessed potential and the potential pitfalls. And so while a lot of the discussion around AI and sort of the environment looks at how data is stored, how much energy is consumed, can we do this climate neutral or not? There's also other questions like, is it worth it? What are the gains? And how can this be harnessed for sort of positive efforts? And there's already two, so Arunesh and Jackie have some great examples as well about the conservational efforts done in relation to AI. And I know Jackie and Khari are also have some critical questions related to AI and the environment. So it will be great to get started. What we wanted to do today is sort of first have our amazing panelists spend some time telling you about their work, about sort of the questions they're struggling with, give some examples. We'll do it in the order where Arunesh will start, as afterward Jackie and then Khari. We'll have a small discussion amongst each other that gives all of you also the time to sort of type in questions in the chat. And then we can open the discussion to everybody. Maybe you have questions, maybe you have comments, maybe you have things you want to share. And that should take us to up to an hour. And then I hope we've had a really fruitful conversation. I see in my tablet that some people are, well, one person has already introduced themselves. So thanks for doing this. Other people also want to do it. We can sort of know what your interests are for joining this panel. And without further ado, I'll just give it to Arunesh, who can talk about some of his work of AI in relation to conservationalism.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Arunesh Sinha. I am an assistant professor in Singapore Management University. So my research is broadly in AI, where besides fundamental research, I have worked on applications for like AI for security, AI for conservation, and AI for healthcare. So in the context of this discussion, I'll talk a little bit about my work in AI for conservation. So I got involved in this conservation project when I was doing a postdoc under Professor Milind Tambe. So at that point, Milind had been working with collaborators, and these include people from Wildlife Conservation Society and Uganda Wildlife Authority in the Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda. The goal of that project, of course, was to prevent poaching. So we had access to about 12 years worth of data. So this was data where about where there had been poaching activity in the past or where the poachers had laid out these traps. And these traps or snares are really horrific things. They can capture animals, and if you Google search for it, the images are really horrific. If you don't want to, then please don't search that. But based on this data, we built a predictive model of where the poachers would lay out traps in future. So that's the predictive part. But AI is not just about prediction. AI is also about how to optimize decision making on top of predictions. So for this problem, the decision here is where to patrol. And this is patrolling by the rangers. And clearly the wildlife park is huge, and there are very few park rangers, and not all areas can be patrolled, of course. So it is very important to intelligently decide where to patrol. So now it might seem like somewhat of an easy task, like we should just patrol those areas with the highest risk of poaching activity. And that might seem to be optimal, but surprisingly, it is not. Because the poachers also anticipate the ranger's behavior and they might strike somewhere else far away from the poaching hotspots. So a somewhat sophisticated model of patrol decision making was used based on concepts of game theory. So we first estimate the poacher's response to the patrolling itself and then decide where to patrol. So overall, this work was great and it was actually successfully deployed. So all of that seems nice, but it was not developed in one go. There were many iterations of developing the predictive and patrolling models, refining them, accompanied with lot of frustration before we finally arrived at the final version that is used currently. And this happened over a long time of 3 to 4 years. Now, of course, some of these iterations actually happened after I had moved on from this university, moved off of this project. But my friends, and I want to mention my friend Fei Fang here, continued to make such models much better. The final product, of course, was quite successful. It was successfully tested in many national parks in the field. And the whole software was named PAWS. And it is now integrated in a larger suite of software called SMART that is used by many wildlife parks across the world. So one thing I want to mention as a valuable lesson from this project is that AI for conservation projects are quite different from the proof of concept research that's mostly done in AI. It is very important for the AI researchers like me or even practitioners to immerse into the domain, as in understand the domain in and out, and not just download some data set and run some code and that's it. So in the context of this work that I described, immersion meant visiting and meeting the rangers, understanding the issues on the ground, such as what are the constraints in patrolling, how does the topography of the national park matter, and other such practical issues. Immersion in this context also meant explaining the AI to people on the ground who may not even have had any education at all. Okay. So such immersion, I believe, is critical for the success of AI for conservation kind of projects. That was one big lesson that I learned out of this project. I'll end just by saying that, of course, AI has a lot of potential in conservation. I mentioned one work that I have worked on here, but I also know that some of my colleagues do work on using AI to predict human-wildlife conflict. And also AI can potentially be used to prevent smuggling of wildlife products in relation to conservation. Of course, in the bigger picture, I think AI can help environment in many different ways. And I hope that we see many such success stories in future. Thanks.
Thanks, Arunesh, for sharing. And I just realized that I completely failed to introduce yourself. So I'll just give a very small background so that everybody on this call knows where you're coming from. So Arunesh is a Lee Kong Chiang Fellow and an assistant professor in the School of Computing and Information Systems at Singapore Management University. And he's conducted research, as he said, on many different areas. And in his paper on wildlife protection, he was nominated actually for the best paper in one of the top research conferences. So I'm just giving a snippet sort of who you are and sort of what your background is. So you are a computer scientist working on these issues. So thanks for sharing your experience in the Ugandan context. And I think you already mentioned two important things. One, AI is for optimization, but optimizing for what? Are we optimizing for people and the planet, or are we optimizing for profits? And then the other thing is sort of like immersion in the field. So in the topic AI will be placed upon. For those who haven't done it yet, who just joined, welcome to our panel on AI and the environment, friend or foe. If you haven't done it yet, you can introduce yourself in the chat. It's helpful to sort of see who's in the room. We'll go to our second speaker, Jackie, who's a freelance journalist published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, National Geographic, and many others. And she covers issues around technology, conservation, travel, culture, and sort of where all of these areas intersect. And I'll give the floor to Jackie.
Great, thanks so much. So I cover a lot about AI, but conservation is probably my favorite area to cover. And I thought maybe just to show everyone what that can look like, I have some slides of the one AI and conservation story I've been able to cover in person over the last year. Obviously, COVID has really limited that, but I had an outdoor, I mean, it's all outdoors, but I had one that was next to the ocean, which felt extra safe. So here is a story that I did about an AI called Shark Eye AI. And this one was pretty personal for me. Oh, wait, sorry, I did not hit share screen. Oh, the host disabled participant screen sharing, so I actually can't share my slides. And we can't hear you, you're on mute.
I'm trying to figure out how to do this, but we also have somebody here that helps us with this, so maybe they can help me. Wait. I am just making you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, yeah, I can. Okay, great. Share.
Great, it works.
Great, yeah. So we're just going to share this whole thing. So this project I covered, it was called Shark Eye AI. And this one felt pretty personal for me. I went to school in Southern California and I like to surf, but anytime I thought I'd see anything in the water or even thought about sharks, I just had to get out because it's pretty stressful. So the idea of having technology that can maybe spot sharks while also helping within the conservation of them was particularly of interest to me. So when I was living in California this summer, I went up to Santa Barbara to this beach where they are piloting this AI. And it's especially important right now because great white sharks used to be pretty rare off Southern California, but now they are coming back. They think it's partially the conservation efforts that are helping, things like gill nets. The laws have pushed them further out, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act has created more food for the great white shark. So we're starting to see a rebound, and that rebound obviously first starts with the baby great white sharks, and they because they don't have as much fat on them, they like to come pretty close to shore. So those are the sharks that if you're going to see a great white while you're out surfing, those are typically going to be the ones that you see. In fact, this is at the beach that I was at. Here is a drone capturing a great white shark, and you can see how close these surfers are to them. So this is something that used to never happen, and now it's happening. You know, there's spots, they're spotting them dozens of times every summer. So one surf camp even left this area because this is a problem that they hadn't had to deal with before, and they just didn't, want to have a bunch of kids in the water and have to deal with shark sightings all the time. But there is a way to share the beach as well as learn more about sharks, and this is the project that Shark Eye AI wants to do. The goal right now is to spot sharks faster so people can make informed decisions about, if they're going to go into the water or not. But the future potential is learning more about sharks, helping to protect them in the future, and also create tools that can, not even just like, oh, there's a shark right now, but here's these days or hours that we think sharks might be even more present in the water so people can make further out decisions. So they are doing that by collecting data to try to spot sharks. And what that looks like is they are going to this beach and doing one pre-programmed flight with a drone to gather data that's really comparable. But then they also do a second flight where the pilot is just sort of, looking for things of interest or, targeting areas that maybe something was seen, but they want to inspect it further. So this is a slide that I stole from their presentation to me. And right now it's all pretty manual. This is not some autonomous system. Right now, these drones aren't autonomous. So a pilot who has to be FAA licensed goes and flies the drone. If they spot anything, because they're watching the footage, watching the camera from the drone, they send a text message to a group of people, like lifeguards, people who live near the beach, and surf schools if they spotted any sharks. So that is also like done manually right now. Then they download the footage and put into these algorithms that go in and then further, they're spotting the same sharks, but then they're also creating this data archive that they can start to build predictions off of. So this is what the algorithm looks like when it's spotting a shark. This area of California doesn't have a lot of other big sharks, like a bull shark or tiger shark, that could confuse the system. So it's actually pretty good at spotting a shark. It's usually a shark. Things that they told me have confused it are manta rays. If they're swimming too close together, maybe it'll have like the general shape of a shark, but otherwise there's not a lot to confuse the system about whether it's a great white shark or not. That previous photo was like ideal conditions, but sometimes, the water can be murkier, the shark can be a little bit further down in the water, or, it can be cloudy, or if you're flying around noon, the glare can be really bad. So here is also, it's still pretty good where it can detect, this blob in the water, that it was a great white shark. And here's a little footage of like the actual footage and how it's detecting it. So you can see that, that looks like a shark, but it's not as clear as some of these, how it's working under conditions that aren't always as easy to see for humans. So it's pretty powerful tool that they are hoping they're going to keep open source so they can give it to other lifeguards or groups that are interested in doing something similar. One day this could be really automated, where the camera could be detecting the sharks, on a chip within the drone and sending alerts that are in real time. There could eventually be a shark report that goes next to a surf report because they have enough data to make predictions about where sharks are going to be and when they're going to be. So this tool has only been running 2 or 3 summers, so it's still really early days. And these sharks still aren't seen in numbers where it's like going to be really easy to make predictions. But this is the kind of tool where we can start to learn about sharks, help get their numbers up while protecting people who are using beaches at rates that we haven't, seen before. That makes me really hopeful, especially the shark report. So, next time I go surfing, I don't have to worry about sharks so much. So if anyone's interested, here's a QR code and a bit.ly for the story. It was in the New York Times in November. So that is just some of the reporting that I get to do and stories that interest me.
Thanks, Jackie. There was already one, let me just find it out, just question maybe for clarification. They will eventually customize the drones, I guess, to automate things?
Yeah, I think that's the hope. There's a lot, that has to fall in line, like the FAA is going to have to allow it and have to have rules around like when you can have autonomous drones. There's already beaches that aren't doing this project. I've been surfing and there's like drones that are flying out to, take photos. There's, other projects that are doing this. So there's going to have to be rules around that from the FAA that have nothing to do with sharks. And, that technology could be pretty expensive to do that autonomously. But, this project has Mark Benioff behind it. So that is a lot of money. So maybe, if not everyone gets to do it, there could be some projects that do get to have really fancy drones flying around. Maybe, individuals could have these drones tracking their surf to, protect people individually. So there's a lot of opportunity. This is very early days.
Amazing. Thanks, Jackie. We'll go to our third panelist, Khari Johnson, who's a senior staff writer at VentureBeat covering AI. He writes stories at the intersection of AI ethics and policy and writes stories about climate change. So the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, so at VentureBeat, I write a lot of stories. Primarily, we focus on business reporting, but I write a lot of stories at the intersection of ethics and policy, and of course, climate change is a big part of that. So I'll just share a couple of links in the chat to recent stories and just kind of walk everyone through each of these things bit by bit. This first one is actually not my story, but it's one story related to a story that I wrote. And, what I would call attention to is just the image up top. And, this is a machine learning emissions calculator that was developed by universities in Canada. I believe Mila in Montreal. I don't recall right now. But you can put in your cloud region, the amount of time you used machine learning hardware, and the cloud provider, and get some sort of number around carbon emissions for a what it took to train an AI model. And this was released in December 2019. During NeurIPS, which is the largest AI research conference in the world. And so it was at a time when they were considering adding, I believe, or there were conversations among organizers of this conference of adding carbon emissions involved with training a model, requiring some form of that, I believe, in research papers, maybe, which would, I think, change sort of the attitudes about the entire space and what makes a good AI, what makes a good model, knowing that efficiency is things to do with business and money, but certainly the carbon emissions related to training models and deploying them can be extensive. I think there was this analysis that found that, what is it, like 2% of carbon emissions in the world are data centers. So in any case, but that's the first one. The second story I would point to, and these are all within roughly the last year of coverage, was a workshop that took place at NeurIPS with a lot of people who were influential in the AI in machine learning research space, including Yoshua Bengio, who in his work, he is one of the, I believe, most cited researchers on the planet, like in anything. And he's been pretty adamant about particularly reducing the amount of travel involved with going to machine learning conferences. And so part of the push that had happened before COVID to make more virtual conferences and machine learning had to do with reducing the carbon emissions of flying around the world to these conferences all year. And so a lot of it'll be interesting to see what happens after this with COVID and everything, if the community continues to go virtual in order to reduce its emissions. But this particular article is on a panel of a lot of people who are influential in the AI space as part of the Tackling Climate Change group, which holds workshop at major machine learning research conferences. And there are people who there are grand challenges in machine learning of beating the world's best chess player or autonomous vehicles, but there are groups like Tackling Climate Change and like Oceania AI, who believe that climate change and solving big problems like that can serve as grand challenges for the machine learning research community. And so I mentioned Oceania. The first details of what Oceania has been doing, which is a project between Chile and France, I believe, at least universities and organizations between the two. I don't know, for the funding and everything. to study phytoplankton species and to create AI systems that can identify particular phytoplankton species and give some understanding of changes in the populations around the world, because similar to like the rainforests, the cycles related to phytoplankton populations have a lot to do with carbon capture, I believe, or oxygen. I'm not a scientist, but it's important. But yeah, so these are some of the more recent stories that I've covered in the last year related to climate change and AI. So yeah.
Amazing, thanks. So I have some questions for our panelists, but in the meantime, if any of the people in the room have any questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat and I'll try to monitor it. Also, if the panelists have questions for each other, it's more than welcome. I'll kickstart with a question for each of you. So I'll start with Arunesh. When we're looking at sort of predicting of wildlife patterns, there's of course also, or poacher patterns, there's a risk. Like when tourists first started taking pictures of wildlife with their mobile phones, it turned out that the geolocation actually led to more poaching actually than, so there's a lot of unexpected consequences to some of the things we do. And I was wondering, while you were immersing yourself within the wildlife parks and also with the rangers patrolling these wildlife parks, if there were any discussions about sort of possible risks within these predictions related to poaching and how you would address them.
Okay, so I guess, I mean, we didn't specifically discuss whether the predictions themselves are risky or not. Of course, if the predictions leak out, in some sense, to the poachers, that's a big risk. But the poachers are also quite intelligent. I mean, they are also they do some sort of a surveillance of where the rangers are actually patrolling. And they build up some sense of okay, the rangers visit this part of the park more, this part of the park less, and based on that, we do need some intelligence in the latter part on where we patrol. And that's what I was referring to earlier. We use a somewhat sophisticated technology behind patrolling. It's we use concepts from this topic of game theory, where we are trying to treat the poachers as an adversary and trying to play a game with them. And if you model it that way, then you can actually do more intelligent patrolling that is able to kind of bypass this poacher's anticipation of what you're going to do, or even if the poacher can somehow see what your patrolling patterns are, even then the poacher might not be able to gain as much out of his poaching activity as possible. Now, of course, this is all subject to a lot of constraints, in the sense that the number of rangers, I think, are in the range of like tens or something, like 40s, 60s, something like that, over an area of about 4,000 square kilometers. So the coverage of the rangers is very, very limited. So I think while our predicting and patrolling patterns help, what could also help more if there were more rangers in the first place. Unfortunately, that's not there. So yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, thanks, Arunesh. It's often with these cases that maybe like the obvious solution is not the one that's possible, like increase the size of the number of rangers, for instance, to stop the patrolling. But thanks for
yes.
Jackie, when we were having a discussion earlier, like well, actually last week, I was really struck by something you said, and I wanted to ask you to sort of elaborate on it for the rest of the people in the room, is that you said there was something unique about the intersection between AI and conservationism that you don't see in other types of sort of AI and sort of environment discussions. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think Arunesh started to talk about it where he mentioned, he has to really get in there and get in the weeds about the problems that conservation is facing, and just really getting to know it, knowing what the rangers, what their days look like, what the area, what the paths that they go on look like, and having that domain expertise is something that in some areas of AI I can see ignored, where these are researchers who think they are machine learning gods and can figure out this whole range of expertise outside of what they've studied with minimal insight. So there's some areas where I see some efforts, like I think in medicine, there's an awareness that people go to medical school and get PhDs that take a long time. So maybe these some of these researchers who are working in the computer space recognize that, or there's even laws that are forcing them to understand that they don't have all the answers. But I've noticed within conservation, there seems to be a respect, and they're coming to this problem with whether it's the researchers who are self-selecting into this area, but there is a respect that they don't understand everything, and they need to work with people on the ground, stakeholders, conservationists who are on the ground, who have studied these issues for years, that that we don't see in every realm. And this also might be me self-selecting the stories that I want to report, but I have never spoken to someone in this field who is not talking to the experts, who is not trying to find out what the community is interested in, what the community knows. And that gives me a lot of hope that some of the mistakes around conservation that we've seen in the past, where it's, white savior, or coming to other countries thinking you can fix things. I'm not seeing those exact same mistakes made again right now.
Amazing, thanks. I think some of the examples that Arunesh, Jackie, that you shared, I was also quite positively surprised about this. So only seeing it from a glimpse, I see sort of similar trends. There's two specific questions for the shark story, but I'll come back to that later. I first also have a question from Khari, and maybe Jackie, you want to then add to this, because both of you cover broad areas sort of AI and environment. And sort of, could you maybe address some of the opportunities and concerns you have around sort of this field? Because when you talk about sort of AI, either people go into doom scenarios or very positive scenarios. Maybe you can tiptoe maybe some of the things that you find quite important for the discussion.
Well, I think something, that what you mentioned before about, unintended consequences is always something that people have to have the humility for. But I think the one thing as it relates to opportunities, well, two things, one on the opportunity, one on the potential, things to be concerned with. The opportunity, the climate change working group that I mentioned previously put out a paper with, I want to say, approximately 100 different use cases of machine learning applied to climate change. And it was really intriguing to me because of the amount of people who were signed on to that, and some of the different, influential people who I mentioned before. But it's a collection of things ranging from public policy in cities, of course, and how efficiencies there could change, the climate change math quickly, quicker than anywhere else, to, weather predictions and things around that. But it's that particular paper, I feel like if there's anything intriguing that I've come across that's worth reading, it's probably that one, because it just has this lush of options, angles that could be taken, that it could be done effectively. not having hubris and dealing with how these things could be done in productive ways that help people, I think is just a matter of investments and setting the sorts of goals that you need for research things to move forward. There was a report that came out last week called the AI Index, and it goes through all these different things of AI's impact on people, and performance standards and all this other stuff. But in talking with one of the steering committee members and writers of the report, he was saying, I really wish that we could come up with better benchmarks that give us goals that are reflections of our values. A machine learning grand challenge around deforestation, the entire community decided to do that. That could benefit the planet greatly, all of us. So I think there is opportunity there. On the risk side, the concern that I have is that compute demands are growing steadily, and the amount that is dedicated to this is going up. So toward that end of goals, it would seem like using something like the compute or the emissions related to a particular model is something potentially worth highlighting. Because if we can get to a place where that's the standard, and that's what, it's not efficiency for accuracy, or at least measured with all these other factors that come in, but anyway, so yeah.
Great, thanks. And sort of just also to add to the sort of this emissions to a model, I think it's quite important. We had a discussion on sort of emissions of AI models, and we tend to focus on sort of like what are the emissions of building the model, whereas if we see as like these bigger models at these bigger companies that could get retrained every day or every so many other days, and sort of what does that cost in terms of emission. And also, yeah, there's many questions around emissions, so thanks for bringing that up. Jackie, do you want to add to this? And then as a follow-up, I also see 2 questions for you in the chat, which I can read up if you don't know where you can find them.
Okay, I think I can find them, but I just want to echo that paper that Khari mentioned is really good. It's really accessible. I would recommend anyone who's interested checking it out. It's really long, but there's everything from like someone with the idea of like using AI to create a photo of what your house would look like with a foot of sea level rise, to taking all the most complex weather models, which are already like the most complex models we have, and combining them all into one weather model to rule them all. So it's from like these really basic ideas to things that are like creating new fields to study. So it's really interesting. The researchers on that are like the top of the field, and it's very hopeful seeing that paper with all the best minds in AI who are doing this. So I like that paper a lot. Has SharkEye been tested with drones that can track an individual person? No, it's sharks. I'm not sure I understand that question. Khari, was that you?
Yeah, I guess the question was like, to your point of being concerned that you're going to be near the shark, like if you're out and you're like early morning surfing, for example, and you wanted to bring like Skydio R2, I think is the company, mm-hmm. They have like a tracker drone that can fly over water. I don't know how long it can actually stay in the air, but like, if an individual wanted to use that as opposed to, public authority doing that.
That's a really good question. They have not done that as far as I know, but that's a really great use case that I think I would have asked them about if I had thought of that drone possibility when I was doing the story. But I know that it's still very early days. I'm not sure if they're ready to release it, but that is a great use case that I would 100% invest in if it was a possibility. Okay, does the AI recognize based on image, or also shark behavioral signatures it can recognize? That is a great question that I was also just thinking about when I was putting these slides together. As far as I know, it's not behavioral signatures. It's all about the shape and the size, not necessarily how the sharks are moving. I know of other computer vision algorithms that are detecting by like the way microbes move. They can recognize like, oh, that's, you know, this one, that's another one. But this one, because great whites have like such a certain shape and size to them, especially the younger ones, it's just size. And I know they're trying to also train it to be able to determine the size of the shark, so you can get these very specific alerts, because baby great whites don't have the right teeth to really mess up humans. There was someone who got bit during this last summer when they weren't out because of COVID, but it was just, you know, not to compare it to a dog, but it was like an ankle biter type attack on the foot, but their mouths aren't in the right shape to really hurt humans. They're just built for fish. So that would even be better, where you're like, okay, yeah, there's baby great whites, not an issue because they can't really hurt humans. Meanwhile, if it can detect that it's a 12-foot shark, that's no longer a baby, and you need to be concerned about that. But it's not signatures right now.
Oh, I'm still unmuted. Great. Thanks, Jackie, for answering the questions. The questions about the sharks keep on rolling in. Maybe you can read it already in the chat, Jackie, and I'll give it to you in a second. I just want to ask Arunesh the same question I asked Khari, but then from sort of more your machine learning point of view, and been working across also topics from sort of conservationalism, but then also you said the medical field, and there's like different things. Where do you sort of see maybe the opportunities and the challenges when we think about AI related to the environment?
Opportunities. So I believe there are many opportunities. I mean, some of them actually. So Khari put this link here, which I was just seeing right now. I mean, it seems like a great list of things on which AI researchers could work on. So I mean, the opportunities are immense. But even in healthcare, so I work on like community healthcare, like improving situation for rural health in India. Even there, the opportunities are immense. But for any of these things to be really successful, we really need people to be involved with the problem, as well as have some patience. These things don't just solve out like in 1 or 2 months. It takes a lot of effort into building the right kind of model. It's an iterative process, and sometimes that takes years. But if there are a lot of opportunities, it requires a little bit of patience, as well as some innovation in tackling some of the unique things that show up in many of these problems. Actually, there are a lot of unique things that show up in many of these problems, and I believe that they can all be addressed. Of course, there's also like might be too much work compared to the number of people who are working on this topic. But if more people get interested, that's even better. So, but there is no dearth of topics as such. I mean, even in like for climate change, there's a few I know from some of my colleagues, like they work on trying to change behavioral patterns of people in the consumption of electricity or gas or water. These are few things I can say off of the knowledge I have. But I think the list that Khari has is quite comprehensive, and that lists a number of topics which can be explored. And this is true for many other topics also. Like even in community healthcare, there are a wide variety of things that could be worked on.
Amazing. Thanks. So again, if there's any questions from people, you want to know something, you want to share something, feel free to sort of raise your hand or write it in the chat. I see that there's Jackie answered a question in the chat and she added a link as well. So maybe a question to Khari and also Jackie. If I like the project Arunesh is talking about is really from he's based within academia and he's working together with sort of sort of ranges within Uganda in this example to predict poacher patterns. And of course, there's a very different incentive for academia to work on these type of issues than it is for business, for instance. Do we see sort of this distinction where maybe certain projects are aimed to optimize for different purposes when they come from more an academic surrounding? I'm not sure who did the shark spotter one, Jackie, in your case, if that was like a business incentive, business or academia. Because of course there is a different tension of what in the end do we optimize for or for what purpose. Maybe Khari, you've been involved sort of in the Silicon Valley, reporting on Silicon Valley. You have an opinion about this?
I mean, the only thing that comes to mind immediately, not that it immediately speaks to the veracity of the research, if it's from India, or excuse me, India, academia or industry, but there are, I would say, people whose opinion is that when big tech companies take on support of, let's say, conservation efforts, that it's like a ethics washing operation, that one hand is doing not great things and another, is not. It's my understanding, though, that there are groups putting pressure on like larger tech companies to, take stands on certain things. It's my understanding. I don't have the information in front of me. Sorry if this isn't totally accurate. Google it. Don't tweet this. But it's my understanding. I think it was like Google it does not accept money for or work on machine learning for like oil drilling. And so there's there are definitely projects around conservation that are popular in lots of spaces, that runs the gamut between academia and let's say nonprofits that are really want to center in on AI for good, and on the other side of people who want to claim that that activity is intended to shape public perceptions about the company, which are the largest on the planet or wealthiest these days. So it does play into that sort of power dynamic, I think. But I wouldn't say that I've seen any evidence of the groups that, for example, I think it was Microsoft supported some conservation efforts, that I believe that they went and found nonprofits that were working on things and provided support to them rather than it being some bootstrap Microsoft thing, So I would, perhaps to that credit, there are very interesting projects in that end as well. The Google.org team did a bunch of various AI supported projects, but again, it does sit in that conversation around power that these companies have amassed, which is unprecedented.
So I want to add on one thing to that. I mean, you said that it's easier to do these things in academia. I won't completely agree with that. But in academia, there is a pressure to publish, and publish in short cycles, like 6 months, 1 year, publish a paper. And as I said, that the cycle for these projects is not short. So getting into these projects, especially for AI and machine learning researchers who publish all the time in multiple conferences every year, is not the incentives are not very much aligned with such kind of projects. But there is a growing community of this AI for good people, and I believe that as the community grows, maybe this kind of work will be more accepted and be publicized more. And also, Khari mentioned google.org. So actually, the healthcare project that I work on right now is actually in collaboration with google.org. So I believe the industry can also some support system that google.org provides is actually tremendously useful for academics like me also.
Yeah. And to your point on the pressure to publish, in the link that I mentioned for the Tackling Machine Learning workshop, Yoshua Bengio, this highly cited machine learning researcher, who's, he's focused in the climate change workshop, that culture to publish and where the culture of where researchers are prioritizing themselves. And that pressure to publish that you're talking about was what he was saying is something that's vital, that needs to change in order for a metric like emission standards for your model, or emission, what your model emits, being some sort of better number or metric for people to follow for the common goals that we have.
Great. Jackie?
Yeah, I just thought, I'd add Microsoft AI for Earth has $125 million that they're giving to, conservation projects. And when you ask the guy who's in charge, who is the, CEO, Chief Environmental Officer, how do you explain this to your shareholders? He makes this good point where if this technology that they're offering up can work in the field, which, not in office, like that is stress testing their technology. So, this is not just all out of the kindness of their heart. There are benefits to them. Probably tax stuff that I don't understand, where they're able to write off a lot of this. And there's definitely like the opportunity to to greenwash it. But they're also, conservation has all these issues that, they don't have as much data as people who are working with online social media data. They have to go put their technology, out in the Arctic or out in these rainforests. So if conservationists create tools that can work with less data or hardware that can survive, stressful situations, that's going to benefit the non-conservation tools. So I think there's, a lot of benefit here for these big guys to get involved in this space, and especially if they're just, handing over, cloud computing time or hardware or software that they already developed. It seems like a very obvious thing for them to do.
Great, thanks. I just been told that I can ask one more question because we have to have a hard cutoff in 5 minutes. So I'm just gonna, my question is just a closing question to all of you about the title of this panel, AI and the environment, friend or foe, ? And maybe you can give a max 1 minute response so that we are finished right on time. And I'll start, Jackie, maybe you wanna kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So I've been thinking about this, and I don't think AI is a friend or a foe for conservation yet. I think it's maybe an acquaintance, where it's still too early to decide which way it's going to go. I'm pretty hopeful, but that might just be because so many other AI uses have gone so off the rails or have such a potential to go off the rails, where I'm seeing, such major issues within the conservation space. That I have to be hopeful that there is going to be something and that AI can be part of the solution to saving the planet. But it's yet to be seen if it's going to actually do that.
Amazing. Thank you. Arunesh, you're next. Friend or foe?
Okay, so I'm also going to take the middle path. So yeah, AI is like any other powerful tool. It's very powerful, and like any other power, it has two sides. Now with the acknowledgement that there is an harmful side, and those things are very well known. All the negative news spreads faster. So with that acknowledgement, I also want to emphasize is there is a friendly side of AI. And some aspects of that we have discussed today. We have seen some projects that have that have been very beneficial. And I believe that as a society we should encourage such AI for good work more, and possibly publicize this even more. So I'm very hopeful that AI can be friendly if we as a society encourage such work in future.
Thanks, Arunesh. Khari, same question to you as a roundup.
Yeah, I would say friend and foe. I think there's some really good applications where just basic stuff like identifying rooftops that could support a solar panel are like, we should all be doing that. Why isn't that everywhere? These seem like good things, and perhaps business opportunities as well, to move in and to get more of those panels on tops of houses. But I think part of what Arunesh was talking about, and what I tried to get to in some of my comments today, were conversations about a culture change within the machine learning community itself to put a focus on what are our priorities, and moving past purely a performance metric of, let's say, accuracy, to being the only number that is respected and considered, not just beneficial for people, but innovative. When you talk about more robust models or more efficient models, you're talking about innovation. The same way that we might talk about bias, machine learning that is not biased towards people is better machine learning. It's not just not racist. It's not just not sexist. It's better machine learning. So, I think there are plenty of ways that it's a foe, on the energy consumption side, that we need to pay attention in trends of compute demand. But there are a lot of opportunities, and one of them being a culture change on the values put on metrics.
Amazing. So the verdict is still out. It's a friend and a foe, and it's an acquaintance at the same time. I want to thank Jackie, Arunesh, and Khari for joining me in this first panel, I think, on MOSFest this year about AI and the environment. And I want to thank John and Sarah of Mozilla for putting this together. And I know there's a lot more exciting panels on AI and the environment coming in the next 2 weeks. So have a look at the schedule. And thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.